Hello and welcome to my three friends that have joined me here, Mary and Angela and Mona. So delighted to have you here. We've never sat together like this before in this configuration in this way for this purpose. So this is really wonderful. And the first thing that we are going to do is land here together. I will guide us into that. And I'm going to include in this landing future listeners. So, dear future listener, if you would like to join us in this moment, please do. And so, for my friends here and for future listeners who can, I invite you to close your eyes. If you can't do that, then just come present to your body and your breath and this moment. And we have the gift of the breath to support us in so many ways, including as such an easy way to guide us into presence. And so just inviting you to notice your breath. Notice as your breath invites you to notice your whole body. Just including your whole body in this moment of space and time. And in this way that we fit together, in this field that we create together, us four here in this time in circle, but included in this field are all of the future listeners. And we sit here together now, coming into this space with the intention to connect to our own spirits through conversation, contemplation, feeling, noticing, and being. And a thank you to everything that got each of us here, to everything that guides us and supports us in this unfolding co-creation. May we be guided in a good way. Thank you. And friends, yeah, I invite you to open your eyes and we'll connect in this way again through through our screen. So I am going to suggest that we start with some introductions, and I'm going to invite each of you to say your full name, your occupation, and a little bit about how spirit fits into the work that you do, either actively or just in, kind of behind the scenes. And when I say spirit, I mean either or both. Uh, the the spirit, the great spirit, whatever that is to you, to us, and or the human spirit, the individual spirit. So however you want to include that and answer that question. Um, so yeah, Angela, could I invite you to begin? Would that be okay?
Hi. So my name is Angela Hunt, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. I have been working as a naturopathic doctor for 13 years, and I work mostly with perimenopausal and menopausal women. And, I would say that spirit is kind of like background work with my patients, but always present in the room. And it's one of the more elusive conversations when I'm talking to people. They come to see me and they expect me to ask them about their sleep and their stress and their food and their even their bowel movements. They're all comfortable with that, but sometimes talking about their spiritual well-being feels they're unsure. They're unsure how to have that conversation. But I know that it plays such an important role in their well-being. And I've seen that and I've witnessed that and I believe that. But I found that I have to find ways to gently kind of approach that conversation because everybody is going to be at a different comfort level of where they are to even verbalize or even have awareness around what does that mean, because it can mean so many things to different people. But I do ask directly every single person who comes to see me, what do they do for their spiritual health? Like I ask it straight on, and sometimes I get a deer in headlights look, right? And sometimes I get these beautiful, long answers of what they do, and it's usually somewhere in between. So, I do include it in my work, but I would say that it's, um, yeah, sometimes it's in the background of what I'm doing. I hope that makes sense.
Totally gorgeous. Thank you, Angela. Mary, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Mary Broder. So I'm a social worker. I've been practicing social work for a number of years, just in community mental health agencies, and moved into private practice 3 years ago. And so, I guess in August it would be 2 years at Kingston Integrated Healthcare. Um, and yeah, I would say similar to what Angela was saying in terms of sometimes it's more in the background, but I really like that idea of it always being present in the room, that there's certainly individuals who will come forward with that initially. And there's some education around how do we talk about that in a way that feels, you know, accepted, I guess, in society, because people get afraid of, I don't want to be too woo woo, or I don't want to be too rigid in this way or that way. And so I will talk about it with people. And I would say that certainly witnessing the healing happening literally in front of me is like a spiritual experience. And it's a really beautiful, like seeing that transformation happening with people. And again, depending on people's comfort level, I'll use different language. But I really like the sentiment from Carl Rogers, that's that unconditional positive regard. As therapists, that's what we're providing. And then there's a lot of attachment piece in that too, of like how are we creating a healthy, secure attachment with someone and nurturing that. And that to me is inherently spiritual then. And so kind of the approach to the work from my vantage point feels very spiritual, but the conversation might be different. And then I think I spoke with you, Sarah, about that. And then, clinically, how am I writing my notes? So it makes sense through therapy modality language. But it weaves in and out, certainly. And I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. I'm inspired by all of you. So thank you. Fangirling over here, as I did to Mona before.
Wow, thank you, Mary. Certainly inspired by you. Thank you. And Mona, how about you?
Hi, everyone. And Sarah, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a privilege. So, my name is Mona Warner, and I'm an Ayurvedic doctor and a yoga teacher trainer and a Vedic astrologer. And I'm just wrapping up my contemplative end of life care training, which has been really fascinating and interesting. And my journey into the work that I do started very much in yoga land, started very much with teaching yoga and then becoming a yoga teacher trainer. And so spirit and spirituality is a huge part of that world. And Ayurveda, as an allied science, is very much spiritual. And so all the Vedic sciences believe in spirit and soul. And even in Ayurveda, we have a type of therapeutic. The Sanskrit is Devya Vyapashraya Chikitsa, but it is the therapeutics or the treatment for the soul and the spirit. So it is so interwoven into the fabric of Vedic science, this idea of soul or spirit. And that said, it doesn't mean that's what everyone wants to talk about. And it doesn't mean everybody is clear on, just because they come to me as a practitioner, whether it be for yoga, for astrology, for end of life care, or for Ayurveda, it doesn't mean they're there to talk about spirit. And yet, woven right into the fabric of even teaching a yoga class, when we say namaste, it is the spirit in me sees, honors, and bows to the spirit in you. And so it's really woven into the fabric. So it's very much part of what I do. Sometimes people come to me for spiritual counseling. And so it's very much like this is what I'm looking for. And other times people just want to poop better and sleep better, which is also fabulous. And those are amazing and useful goals. So it's definitely part of Vedic land and in the world that I'm in. And it's always really interesting. I love what Angela and Mary shared about like the how we have these conversations with folks, because I so much agree with Mary that part of the medicine is the person you're working with. And so if you're coming in for something, the therapeutic relationship is either adding to the medicine or it's not. And so how we have these conversations with folks and their level of readiness and comfort. It's in the death care training that I've been doing, that's been so interesting, where some people don't want to talk about that at all. They're not comfortable with that. Okay, then let's talk about something else, and maybe that arises and maybe it doesn't. And as a practitioner, not my call, right? I don't drive the bus. The client drives the bus. The person drives the bus. And so we navigate and we drive and we explore the terrain at their level of comfort and in the way that feels safe and supportive for them. And if that includes spirit, great. Ayurveda and yoga and Vedic astrology, they're all about that, right? And if not, that is equally okay.
Wow, thank you, Mona. Oh my goodness, you three. Um, I I will join in here too on this. My name is Sarah Knight. I am an intuitive energy healer. A lot of the work I do is supporting people in, first of all, acknowledging, seeing in some way, and feeling, and maybe even, I mean, is the goal being released from the energetic, familial, and inherited ancestral burdens that are just a part of arriving here in these bodies. And I absolutely love that work. It's through a body of work called Family Constellations. I'm also a Reiki master and teacher, which is deeply spiritual, just in its very nature. And a bioenergy practitioner, and no formal training in spiritual guidance, but that forms a big part of what I do. As I mean, spirit is at the center of what I do, and I don't have to hide that, or and usually don't. I'm sensitive to people's limitations, but when people come to me, it's because that's what they want. That's the understanding. So I get to fully include spirit in my language and in the work that I do. And most of the time, what I notice almost immediately is people's relief at being in a space where that word is just normal. And yeah, we're putting that at the center of what we're doing is just normal. Um, so yeah, so thank you all for sharing. My where I'd love to go is actually something that you all spoke to, but that you said really quite beautifully in one sentence, Mary. You said, "How do we talk about the spirituality in a way that feels accepted?" And, this is really important because we know that we have, within our families, within our communities, within our cultures, we have these tribal codes. And there are boundaries around that. There's agreed upon conditions. And generally, we call what sits inside that space normal. And outside of that space, I think you even said this, Mary, outside of that space can be, lives like weird or woo woo or eccentric or maybe even wrong or mad. I mean, things outside of that space can be seen as, in fact, downright dangerous, and might certainly, speaking about this in a very open way, as women, might have been very dangerous in quite recent historical times. And so, as we begin this, for our future listeners, that we're even listening to this might feel risky, and maybe even if they don't plan on telling anybody they've listened to it. But we have our own identities, right? Self-judgment, because they're like you can be embarrassed of your own self when you're completely by yourself. So your own judgments can come up, your own rejecting of your own self and this identity that you've worked hard for. But like, I mean, we're all, if certainly for anybody that's listening, and for I think a lot of the people that we come across, we've spoken to this, what is that spirituality right now is still I would say, largely outside of the realm of normal. And we could, there would be a whole other podcast to talk about how we got here and why we got here. And that is shifting. But any tips or thoughts on, as people are either listening to this in this moment or trying to get curious or address that longing in their own lives, on, what to do with the potential barrier of fear, the fear of the risk of rejection, whether imagined or whether real, what to do when that comes up, so that, to be able to still pursue this curiosity and this longing. Any thoughts? Any tips?
It's been my experience that anytime we're exploring something new, regardless of what the subject matter or the content is, finding a community of folks who are involved in that pursuit, in that study, in that curiosity, and in that interest can be a little intimidating, maybe at first, however, also incredibly useful. In the Vedic tradition, we talk a lot about Sangha, and Sangha translates to company that helps to elevate us so that we can then explore the different aspects of our curiosity, identity, potential. Um, and so, to maybe, if there is a particular area of spirituality that's of interest, we could start maybe with a library and finding books, and then seeing if there are communities or groups or meetings, gatherings, sanghas, as we would put it in Veda land, where then conversation can happen. Because when we're exploring, it's been my experience with what I've studied that having other people to talk to about it can be really helpful. And if I'm not sure the people that I'm currently keeping company with are interested or open to talking about that, then it can be useful to have somebody else or another group of folks to chat with about it. And not that I necessarily have to buy the thing. I tell my tell my students and clients all the time, I'm not here to sell you anything. Right? So it's not that they're necessarily trying to sell you a belief system, but how interesting to be able to actually talk about it and explore it and engage with it and engage with others who are also interested in learning about it or who know about it and can share their wisdom and their experience.
I really appreciate that you pointed out also you can start in a library with books. I think there's a few podcasts that I listen to but there's one that I'm kind of quite obsessed with. And I don't know them. I don't know the other people that listen there, but I feel a part of their community. I feel included in the way that I think in the non-ordinary way of spirit, right? In the ways of form, we have to make physical contact with each other in community, but in the ways of spirit, we can feel and participate in connection in non-ordinary ways. And yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mona.
I agree with Mona. I think finding your community is really important because it just also kind of normalizes or makes it feel like you're less of this outsider with these strange belief systems. Sometimes that's hard though, right? Sometimes it's really hard to find the people who you're like, oh yes, okay, this is aligning. And so sometimes I find that people have to kind of like dip their toe in, especially if I'm like introducing this idea of spirituality to someone and it feels completely foreign and they're not even sure where to start. I usually get them to start with nature. Like that's usually my touch point. Like, okay, like trying to help them be like, what's a time where you felt connected to something bigger than yourself, right? Because sometimes like that is a place where like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable with that. I could go hang out in a woods. I could go hang out under the stars or under a full moon, right? Because that feels very approachable. And sometimes I just start getting them to kind of connect with this idea of connecting to something that's not just like little them, but like the bigger picture. And it sounds little, but it's like this little step towards the direction of this idea of connecting to that bigger picture, right? But they're feeling really isolated and lonely because they're not sure how to connect with that, even though most of them know that it's out there, but they're just like, I don't know the language or how do I access this or like, how do I do that? So that's a lot of times how I start that process for them.
I love that. Yeah, pointing people to connect with the more than humans that we share this world with. And that's a very, again, and not necessarily the way that we would that way that we would think of communication in an ordinary kind of way. If Lisa Sabatini, I will say a bit about her at the end. She was also supposed to join us here this evening. She couldn't make it. Lisa is an earth medicine woman. A lot of what she does is rooted in shamanism. So I'm sure she would have a lot to say in that regard too, Angela. But yeah, I love that pointed the easy in nature and finding or beginning to find spirit there, community there. Thank you.
Something I was just thinking about as well is following that thread. So if there's something there that people are going, what is that? Giving yourself permission to have that curiosity and knowing that you don't have to wear the certain clothes to the yoga class. You don't have to know the chants. You don't have to, like going off of what the other two are saying. But there's something profound about that permission piece, I think, that can open up access to something that's, I would say, already there. But it's like, how do you drop into it? And then the touch point being nature, and then having Sangha. And I love that idea of being elevated. And it's like, how do we elevate those parts of ourselves? Because if it's coming up, then it's already there in some capacity. We just want to kind of lean into it or grow it. So that's just what came up for me around that.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think I was thinking something along the same lines, Mary, like the permission to feel the fear and do it anyway. Like to know in any new, whenever, if we're breaking beyond any limitation, fear is the natural response, right? And so this is just a part of that. It's natural, it's human. You're maybe supposed to feel it. And it's not necessarily intended to stop you. Um, the something that I often suggest to my clients when, this comes up in a variety of ways is to thank the fear and the mechanism behind the fear. Like, I understand you are there just to keep me safe, like, and thank you. And I hear what you're saying. And yes, I'll be careful and, whatever. Thank you. And it's okay. Like, I give myself permission to do this and I'm safe here and I'm just getting curious. Um, and that we all feel it. It's a pity, I think, that certainly in North America, um, uh, comfort is again included in what's normal, right? Discomfort is wrong. We're not supposed to feel that. And yeah, if we lived in a culture that was better able to include the normal responses of fear and discomfort as a part of progressing and growing, maybe it wouldn't be something we'd so have to avoid. But I want this leads me so we hear this term, I think, a lot, like in listening to podcasts or reading books or whatever, spiritual awakening, right? That's kind of like all kind of, you know, thrown about a bit. And there might be people that really want that, and might be people that like that's the last thing that they want. It might also feel really like a language that's really sort of alienating. But it got me, when I was contemplating tonight, it got me thinking about how in any awakening, right, the eyes open and we generally see beyond, whatever the illusion of what we previously, took to be the limitations of reality. When we're talking about spirituality, we're talking specifically about actually like the illusion of all of material reality. But, that's again, not to go down on a total tangent. But, I don't, perhaps total shattering of the illusion of very limited material reality. And it reminded me, it was actually in another podcast I was listening. I don't know if she meant this, but she spoke to being disillusioned, right? Which is like the shattering of the illusions. And then I remembered a chemistry term from my science days, which is dissolution. And it's spelt differently, but in chemistry, dissolution means to dissolve, to disintegrate. And that is, when we speak about alchemy or hero's journey, or we often talk about this place in the crucible where we do disintegrate, like the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly turns to goop. And I think that there is some part of that in the spiritual awakening where our structures are breaking, and it can be very, very uncomfortable. And so, all of you engage with your clients very openly sometimes about spirit. And I get what I'd love to hear from you is, what does spiritual awakening mean to you? Is that even a helpful term? Or, if it is a helpful term, just to, kind of, put a boundary around something that we're talking about here. What are the signs? What are the symptoms? Like, how do we know that our spirits are calling, that something is wanting to be woken up?
At least I can say personally for myself, but then also my clients too. Um, there's usually a part where it feels quite terrible. Like there's a real messy middle there where they feel untethered, they feel lost, they aren't even sure what is up and down, right? Because there's this part between you're breaking down some of those structures, belief systems, but you haven't fully figured out what you're building yet. And so there's that middle zone, which is incredibly shattering, if you will, right? And I think for me, as a practitioner, it's kind of just being that anchor for those people in that moment. Like, I know things feel so untethered and it feels really unstable right now, but you're going to be okay. And I usually tell them to take it really slow, make no big life decisions, right? It's just like going back to what Mona said, like, let's go back to foundations. Like, are we eating enough? Are we sleeping? Let's just really taking care of our physical form as our spiritual self is doing all this dramatic growth, right? Like really helping them feel like they get rooted. Because it's going to get better, but they need that reassurance because in the moment it feels like they've made a big mistake and they're feeling really lost. That's been my own experience and my own spiritual awakenings, and also watching people move through them. It's scary. The middle part is scary and they're a bit lost, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Totally, totally. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, and that is, I think, certainly one of the signs and symptoms that, of a spiritual awakening, extreme discomfort. Maybe fear and regret. Have I made a mistake here?
Yeah. I love what Angela said about it being messy. I tell my students and my clients often, if you're going to engage in these practices and hop on this path, get a good set of rubber boots and a kick and mop because you're going to need to, like, it is a messy, messy process. And one of the biggest obstacles is our ideas about the process, where we think that in yoga land, it tends to be referred to as enlightenment, right? So are we going to become enlightened? And the intention is to free ourselves from all of the inner encumbrances that stop us from meeting reality as it is and ourselves as we are. So let's face it, big undertaking. You are going to need rubber boots and a mop. And in yoga, in the yoga tradition, there's actually a lot of information about it's yoga is a really interesting map of this process. That is actually what yoga is about. Yoga is the process of working with the mind in order to access the spirit. And so yoga has map upon map upon map, depending on which aspect of the yoga tradition you want to follow. If you're a karma yogi, then this happens through action. If you're a bhakti yogi, this happens via devotion. So those who are already oriented towards certain types of spirituality might find that type of practice great. In Raja Yoga, it's through and via meditation and ethical and moral principles. So all to say, there are all sorts of paths and all sorts of maps because everyone's a little different and people might want to explore a different process. And when I think about the term like spiritual awakening, I feel like that feels very big and lofty, just like enlightenment feels very big and lofty. And I typically work with folks more or less to simply increase our self-awareness. Increase our self-awareness. Can you get to know yourself a little bit better today? The belief in the Vedic tradition is that the spirit is the size of your thumbprint and a little flame seated in your heart space. So the more and more you get to know yourself, should you be interested in exploring such things, you'll get there. And so I talk to my clients a lot about how all we're trying to do is expand our self-awareness a little bit at a time so that it feels digestible and not so scary and maybe even not quite so messy. You only need the rubber boots. You don't need the mop all the time. And then when we're ready, we can simply keep growing that self-awareness. And because we are so interconnected with all things, oh my gosh, the screen just did like, Zoom, you freak me out, Zoom.
Perfect. For anybody that's listening in the future and not watching the video, whatever Mona just did with her hands, it was perfect. As she was speaking to like the bigness of things, fireworks went off behind her. That was fantastic.
Zoom freaks me out. Anyhow, all to say, should one choose to endeavor on the path of increasing self-awareness, if they are interested in that layer of spirit and spirituality or soul or however it is that that one wants to describe, or whichever words feel more appropriate, it's there.
Mona, I mean, what you and Angela both said, like about the, the gentle, digestible, you don't have to do it all at once. I think we're going to come back to this, Mona, but I really like a few what you pointed towards is that it also isn't what you think. Like we also, if we just think about a spiritual person, right? We're all going to have the same image in our minds when I say that. Think of a spiritual person. Yes, they're cross-legged and they're meditating, and there's, I don't know, rays of light either coming out of their head or into their head. Yes, and angels and all of that, right? So and that's not what it is. And I think the only thing that I'd like to add in there is that sometimes there's no choice about the force of the spiritual awakening, which was the case for me. I got very, very suddenly physically ill, and almost overnight spirit came. I was surrounded. It was so sudden and so huge. And luckily, it happened because I could only but surrender my physical body. I was physically quite incapacitated. So I had no choice. And sometimes that happens, right? There is, yes, like if we can choose gentle and slowly, for sure. And if we can't, well, then I guess surrender takes over, and that's a whole other yeah, divinely gifted superpower that sometimes we really need.
I had a teacher who used to say that. He said, if you're interested in enlightenment, you have two options. Work at it slowly and diligently, disciplinedly and wholeheartedly, a little bit every single day. And he said, or option two, forget everything you think you know and just step in.
And I think that was why, and I knew that was why it happened to me, because I had ignored the call. I had ignored and denied. So I had been, for years, I had been offered a gentle path. Mary, I think you were leaning forward. Were you gonna add something there?
Oh, I was thinking about my yoga training a number of years ago, and the teacher laughing at us when we were getting overwhelmed with all the elements of the training. And he goes, "Oh, it's a pressure cooker," you know, and and that's one element. And obviously, when you're speaking of spiritual awakening, there's so many more components there. But one thing that really comes up for me too is this concept of like unlearning. So yeah, unlearning what we think is how it's supposed to be, unlearning how we're supposed to be while we go through it to various degrees, right? Like the shedding, in yoga, they're often talking about the different layers of the onion. Okay, on to the next. So I just got done with that level. It's like video game. Like, oh, damn. Another thing is life is presenting me with, my sister and I will, if something difficult is happening in life, oh, good one, life. All right. How do I turn and face this? Um, and yeah, and I think being aware of the potential for the spiritual bypassing as well, because sometimes that's a component that, so there's my cat in the background. That's, yeah, important to go. It's okay if you don't have the answers, find the guides, right? Do that spiritual counseling with Mona, or go into some of these depths, find your sangha, but really to have that idea of like, how do I not put pressure on myself for this to look any certain way? And yeah, the piece that Angela was speaking to, of that trust that when you do come out the other side, whatever that looks like, there's often a coming down that happens, and an embodiment that happens for people, and this idea of integration, and to give time for the integration, because we live in such a fast pace, like, oh, I need to read this spiritual book. I'm not, I need to get, pay my children. I need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I'm not comfortable yet. So what the heck's going on? And that patience, I think, that can come with that. not sure if I'm on the same vein as what you're talking about, but this is where my
Yeah.
brain's going. But but yeah, that
Beautiful.
that piece, because like the coming down, I think is really important because often there's a lot of up and out. And it's like, okay, how do we re-embody um, and help that to integrate?
Mary, I'd love to hear more from you on that. And I think so you said the term spiritual bypassing. And then I think I know, you said, talking about coming down and kind of going up and out. Can you elaborate a bit more? You said, I mean, a few things in the email exchange that we had, and you spoke to this coming down and this grounding and this deepening and this, the strengthening of the nervous system. So I'd love for you. Yes, you absolutely are on the right track, new track, whatever it is. I'd like to hear more. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go off screen just to plug my laptop in. So yeah, if you're okay to say more, Mary.
Yeah, and I think if others have ideas too on speaking to that piece, but I think the spiritual bypassing being sometimes, and we can use different terms, but sometimes getting caught in, again, the way the spiritual path is supposed to look, or forgetting our humanity, I guess would be a big part of that. And unfortunately, one of the questions you had sent before was the marginalization around spirituality or what's missing. And I think unfortunately that's sometimes it, right? That sometimes there's leaders within the spiritual community, various communities and religious communities certainly, that have, Ken Wilber talks about lines of development that maybe have developed certain ways, but then there's other human aspects that, they can speak and be eloquent, and then they come home and they're really mean to their partner. And it's like, we're all human, so there's that messiness, certainly. But how do we have a congruence? And how do we walk the talk as well, right? So that's kind of what I mean when I speak to spiritual bypassing. Maybe taking it out of the intellectual understanding of it, because we see that a lot too. Um, there's a lot of words to use, but it's like, okay, then what does that look like? How do you align that with your value system, or what does that actually look like when you're integrating those pieces? Not, again, not putting pressure on yourself for that to look a certain way, but I think that's important in the spiritual world, and bringing it back to the disillusionment that can sometimes happen for people.
Totally. Beautifully put. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's something I would uh that I think sits at the core of like how I try to hold it, and often how I speak to it is that yeah, it's about climbing up the mountain. You don't stay at the top of the mountain. Like you bring it down. You bring the light, you bring the learning, in the hero's journey, like you go off on your quest and you gather new medicine and then you bring it back. Like that's the point, right? to bring it to bring it back to do the work here. It's a lot easier, would be a lot easier, I think. I don't know because I've, having done one 10-day silent Vipassana retreat, actually being silent and meditating for 10 days was actually really, really hard. So I was going to say it's a lot easier to be spiritual when you're somewhere, when you're on the top of the mountain or in a, where that's where you live in a monastery or whatever, but it brings its own set of difficulties. Um, yeah, I would love to hear even more on like about why we need this too, like why it's so important that we bring it back, that we walk the talk. But before we jump ahead to that, Mona, you want to jump in here too?
I so appreciate what Mary shared because I think it highlights one of the biggest challenges in the world where people are talking about and claiming spirituality. This idea of actually being able to integrate the theory, practice, embodiment. I love what you said, Mary, about aligning it with one's values, because I think that's part of the challenge is everyone's path is unique to them. And yet we have these pictures, and I often joke with my clients and students about the picture on the box is not actually what we're going to be doing, because it doesn't always look like the person wearing all white sitting on a beach at sunset with the scarf blowing in the background while they are in perfect meditation and the lighting is excellent, right? It doesn't always look like that. And so many of the practices and the traditions that I work with are very layered. And so, as you're introduced to a practice, the surface, right, the outer layer of the onion, it might be like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. And then all of a sudden, when that peels back, we're like, oh, there's another layer. Oh, there's another layer. This practice actually has so much nuance and so many opportunities for refinement, and there's no end. And I think that's the piece is sometimes we engage in something because we're trying to check a box somehow. And spirituality is not a box to be checked. It's an kind of an approach to living. At least that's how we see it in yoga land. It's a way that we live, which again, to quote Mary, it was so beautifully put, that hopefully really allows us to embody our humanity. And in doing that, enables us to feel really deeply connected with all the other beings, humans, animals, plants, water, earth, stars, sun, moon, luminaries. It's it's remembering that we are a strand in the tapestry of the universe and actually feeling that, that we are part of this greater matrix of pretty awesomeness. And so, anyhow, thank you, Mary. That was really beautifully put.
Oh, and that was beautifully put, Mona. So, why is it important? What are the consequences? Mary, you actually said this too, that the peeling back of the layers of forgetting. I can't remember what way you put it, but when we were talking about spiritual awakening, whatever way you put it, Mary, it was like, oh, it's actually remembering, right? It's just peeling back the layers of illusion or the layers of forgetting or whatever. And I think there's a lot of uh, personal consequences to this forgetting and collective consequences to this forgetting. So yeah, Mona, the way like it's important to remember that we are a part of this, one thread in this great tapestry of the universe. So like why? What are the consequences? What do you see in your clients? And this could be, maybe from like a pathology kind of point of view, mental health, physical health. Maybe you want to speak to, kind of the collectively what's happening, but I'd love to take our conversation there a bit. Mona.
Veda land has one word for it: suffering. We suffer because we mistake ourselves as separate. And in that sense of separateness, we become attached to certain things because they bring us comfort. And so our suffering is reduced a little bit. We then try to push away anything that could possibly make us uncomfortable. And then we get afraid that the delicate balance of control that we've tried to instill goes off balance. And then we organize all of our inner resources to try to maintain that control of I keep close to me that which I like, I push away from me that which I dislike, and I'm just hanging on. And it's not that the irony in a way is this idea that we will somehow via spirituality land in a place of no suffering. We live in the realm, according to the Vedic tradition, it's called the Mrityu Loka. And Mrityu means things die. And so we literally live in the world where things are born, they exist, and they die. Suffering is inevitable. However, there's this whole other layer of suffering that we can create for ourselves in how we relate to reality. And so the Vedic tradition its whole intention is to reduce all the unnecessary suffering possible, the unnecessary inner turmoil, the unnecessary outer turmoil. We are going to suffer because when something we love, we lose it, we're going to be sad. That's part of it, and that's natural. However, whether we fight it, whether we try to keep it longer, we try, like all the different things, we can create so many other layers of suffering. And the more we suffer, energy is contagious. And so if we end up with a lot of suffering, so much suffering, we can't hold it within the container of our being, then we start to shoot it out into the environment and at each other. And I don't even need to give examples of that. We see it all the time. So the consequence is that extra suffering.
Yeah.
And I see this a lot of my practice, like when you then layer in, so you have this suffering, right? To me, that shows up a lot as like anxiety, wanting to have control, but can't have full control, right? Because they're trying to control all these pieces. So there's usually anxiety and insomnia, which then can swing into depression because they're feeling lost and isolated. And then we're living in such an interesting time because then you layer in things like, social media and all these kind of illusions of connection with each other that aren't actually kind of like high value connections, which even just makes the isolation even more extreme, especially I think for younger people, right? So they're not realizing that they're a thread in the tapestry. And now they're just like feeling so disconnected from each other and society. And it's only right. And then you throw in AI, and now this virtual reality, right? So now they're just becoming more and more disconnected to the whole picture, right? And so it's getting worse and worse because they're just getting more and more disconnected, where what we're talking about is like how to get them more connected. Right? And I think we're just going to see more and more physical disease as we get more and more disconnected. And it's going to show up in all kinds of ways, like definitely the mental, emotional, but I also think there's lots of physical conditions that show up, right? It's just an internalization of emotions over time, right? They have to go somewhere, right? And they will turn into disease states eventually, right? So I totally agree with everything you're saying, Mona. I just feel like that we're seeing a worsening of it because of all the technology that's been layered now on top of it. So it's an interesting time to watch all of it happening.
It is, isn't it? When in some ways we've never been more connected, but it's such I don't want to say false, but but without spiritual depth, without that layer. It's one kind of connection. But without that, all it does is like that. I mean, what you were taught, I love the way you put it too, Mona, the very delicate balance when we have so much suffering, right? And then all this attachment, and then we normalize attachment. We think that's normal, that we get to want things and have things, and that's the normal way to be in the world and the normal way to be okay. And in the work that I do, we look a lot at the ancestral patterns of suffering, and that in the different ways, the different faces of suffering, whether that's isolation or addiction or poverty, or we can have great loyalty to suffering. We actually feel bound to stay within the limitations of our ancestors, and if that meant suffering, then that's where we're going to stay. And so suffering can feel not just normal, but like that's where we're good and where we're right and where we belong. Um, and I think a lot better understanding of all this needs to be had. It's so much more nuanced than just, oh, this is the way I am, and this is the way society is, and this is the things that we are supposed to do. Mary, can I bring you in again? Because you spoke directly in one of our emails, you spoke directly to how you either maybe you intentionally bring it in or how you notice when you're working with people specifically on how trauma is manifesting for them and their, traumatic experiences, their traumatic pathways. How connecting them to that deeper, wider place of oneness helps them move out of where they're caught in their cycle of trauma. It wasn't your words, but it was something like that.
Much more articulate than my words. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think from, you know, there's so many ways, again, like the language piece of how is this working, So I would say there's something about helping to ease out of the racing mind. And that can be through, like, sometimes I'll do a guided meditation sort visualization thing as like preparation. So people feel they have inner resources so that when we go to do some trauma processing and that distress comes up, they feel confident that they can bring it back down with my guidance. But there's like the inner resourcing is really important ethically, but also just from that empowerment perspective. And there's something that happens where, and it's often confusing for people because they go, what is this EMDR? What is this trauma processing? It sounds like, it just sounds confusing, right? And I try to explain it through understanding the mechanics of the brain and all of those pieces. But it's really special to see, okay, let's say we're working with a negative belief, I'm not good enough. We kind of get to the core of that. And where does that originate from? And somehow we would call like adaptive information processing happening. Something's happening, the mechanics of the brain. But I think on a deeper level, there's this letting go of a narrative, letting go of an attachment to suffering because I deserve, because of X, Y, and Z, right? So there's different developmental components around responsibility. And again, that permission piece, what would that be like to allow yourself to heal? It's even just the question of that, I can feel it. So the relaxing of the shoulders, there's like I can breathe now, right? And having someone to give that permission. But I forget what the original question was. Um, I can get abstract pretty easily.
I don't know what it was, but I love what you said.
Okay. Right on.
Yeah. What would it be like to allow yourself to heal? It's beauty and the
Yeah.
inner resourcing,
Yeah.
required to allow for that. That's
And
beautiful.
yeah, and sorry, just to go off of that a little bit more, that when we're looking at assessing different components of going into trauma processing, part of it is figuring out what's that negative cognition, and then what do we want the positive cognition to be instead, and what's the validity of that right now, and then what's the validity of that after we've maybe cleared out some of that distress, images, emotions, body sensations, and seeing that strengthen is really beautiful as well, because that's their words, even if it's hard to come up with at the beginning. It's like, in yoga too, of that idea of those like knots, we're like relaxing them and releasing them, right? And then that block isn't there. We can talk about blocking beliefs or those knots, or just that those veils, right? Of like, okay, the clouds are there, we know the sun is also there. How do we just gently help the clouds to move out of the way? And you can feel that sunshine, or you can feel that sense of awe that Angela was speaking to, right? And then it's almost like it just naturally moves into this this feeling, this visceral experience of like, oh yeah, I'm connected to something bigger. I'm less analyzing it cognitively and I'm feeling it. And I remember this, one of my professors, when I was doing my master's program with Laurier, I had really honestly one of the greatest honors of my life to be part of this program. That was the Indigenous field of study. Being a non-Indigenous person, having access to that was amazing. And one of the professors, Kathy Absalon, would talk about different ways of knowing, and to be able to tune into those that were so Western focused, we're so focused on that cerebrally, and how do we come down? So just some of my thoughts. I know I'm sure I could I'll come up with something else as I'm falling asleep. Oh, that. But
Wow.
that's what I have right now.
And it's such a gift, Mary. Like when you just remind me when you're saying that about when I see patients who have that sense of knowing. So and it could be so many flavors, right? It can be, it doesn't matter, that's the thing that's always amazed me. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's in like a really religious context, if it's in an ayurvedic context, if it's an indigenous, it doesn't matter. But if they have this belief that they can be held, right? That something is holding them, that there is something who is taking care of them at their core. It is a place of resilience, right? And I've seen it again and again that those people who have that knowing, and even though their knowing could be all kinds of different ways, there is this resiliency that they carry because deep down they feel held. They feel taken care of by the universe, by source, by God, whatever language we want to use. They feel that they are cared for and loved on a deepest level. And that is so, so therapeutic. And so whenever I see those people who I know have that, I'm like, oh, you're going to be good. We're going to be good. You're going to do all kinds of good work here. Right.
Angela, that's so amazing. And it ties into what you were talking about earlier about the idea of connection. It's about connection. And one of the things that arose in my mind when Mary was talking was the language piece. And sometimes people think that because they can't explain it with words, it's not real, they're doing it wrong. However, when we move into the realm of spirit, it doesn't have a language because the language we use is for this world of form, this world of duality, this world of is it hot, is it cold, is it heavy, is it light? Whereas the language of spirit moves into art and poetry and dance and expression and just feeling. And there aren't really great words necessarily for everyone for all of these experiences. And so sometimes people think they're failing at their spiritual practice because they can't describe it and they can't explain how they feel. And they can't, and it's like, oh, you know what? You're probably there because these, like, how would the sun explain its connection to the moon and the planets and the earth and the stars? It doesn't need to. That's why it just doesn't. And Mary was using these beautiful metaphors. The clouds are there, but the sun is always there too. And when the clouds part, we feel the warmth of the sun, right? So, metaphor, poetry, art, dance, expression, these are actually the language of spirit far more than words, because words are meant to describe something else. Whereas this idea of connection, whether it's connection to one another or connection to something greater than, it's not a word thing.
Oh, you put that so beautifully. Oh my goodness. And so did you, Angela and Mary. We're coming close to wrapping up. And so, I mean, if I had have asked each of you to like offer final bit of like nuggets of wisdom so that we could wrap up, is what a beautiful way to move towards close. Um, and Mona, following on from what you said, like this language of spirit, yeah, it's symbolic. So just not in words, it's felt. And where what I'd like to do to actually wrap up is like some either tips from your professional practice or from your personal practice. And I think something that I would say following on from you, Mona, is the time and the space to engage in a symbolic way, in a present moment way, in an unscripted way. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to turn up and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to put the music on. I'm going to move my body. I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to stare at this piece of art. I'm going to like notice the responses in my body. I'm going to see what happens. Spirit works in all of those ways. But when we script, which is most of the time what we do, right? That's then we're operating in a very limited way in the world of form. The world of form drags the past forward to form the present moment and predict the future. And that's not where spirit works. And so yeah, it's messy, it's unknown. For me, it looks like sometimes sometimes really sloppy meditation, sometimes really emotional ones, sometimes really beautiful ones. But turning up and sitting there is what the mystic in me needs to commune with the realm of spirit. And that's a longing, and that's absolutely a need. Am I attached to that? Like, maybe Mona, maybe we need to talk about that, but maybe that's an okay kind of attachment. um so yeah, would love to hear. Oh, I mean, Angela, the words that you said about, what you in your profession, you help people through the phases of their disease manifestation. And if they have this connection to the deeper thing, what you said was, oh, we're going to be okay. Like that's, you know, you're going to be okay. And I know you have such a look, I don't want to put this on you, but I know that you include very actively include spirit and spirituality in your life. So yeah, to close, tips from your own practice, from your professional practice for people that want to leave more room to get curious about spirit.
Um, I guess for myself, the journey, my own journey it's been messy. Even when, like Mona said, like, there was parts where I didn't have the language. Like my whole 20s, I felt like I was a spiritual person without the language. And it felt like I was a sham almost. Like I wasn't doing it right because I kind of grew up in one tradition, but that didn't really fit anymore. But I didn't know where I was. I was kind of like a vagabond, just walking around, not sure. Um, and in some ways, I think I'm still making it my own personally of what it is for me to be spiritual. What's worked for me in my own life is connecting with nature in the seasons. Um, and that's worked really well for me, right? Like when I um, kind of found some of that teaching, and a lot of it was in pagan teaching, but it was in a lot more than just that. When I was like, oh, like we can have a celebration with the seasons and we can do it every Sabbath. And it gave me these really good touch points that always bring me back to the practice. And personally, I needed those. Like I needed the touch points of being like, oh, okay, every new moon, I sit down and do a meditation and intention setting. And then every full moon, I kind of release that. And guess what? The moon is really predictable. So it's been really great for me because the moon keeps showing up and I keep showing up. And this is working because it's allowing me to keep engaged with that practice. So for myself, I do need a little bit of that routine, and nature's provided that for me. It's provided the routine that I can kind of keep working with and showing up. So personally, that's how it works for me. And sometimes, honestly, my recommendations to patients are a little bit of sprinkle of some of that, right? Of just going out and connecting with the season and where it's at and seeing what that comes up for them and how that feels. Right. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's for myself, like that's worked really well for me in my life right now. And it keeps changing. And I think we have to be okay with that too. We have to be okay that the spiritual being I am now will be different, and my practices and the rituals and all the things that I'm doing are evolving and changing. And that's okay. Right. Because that's an important piece to the journey too, I think.
Gorgeous. Thank you. I love that. The moon keeps turning up, so do I. Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Angela. Yeah. How about you, Mona? And by the way, I get from what the fact that your work is founded on a body of science where there's one strand dedicated to the treatment of the soul and spirit. That there is, yeah, that, from a professional point of view, you could probably answer this in many volumes of a book. So again, I'm asking you to do a hard thing here.
I have two thoughts. I have two thoughts. The one is to be present with the breath. So if at any point you're not sure, there's doubt, there's confusion, there's uncertainty. Do I even want to be a spiritual person? I don't know how woo-woo I want to get. I love that term, by the way, Mary. I love the term woo-woo. It's one of my faves. I believe there's really, really incredible value in pausing and taking a breath in and taking a breath out. In French, the inhalation is l'inspiration. And the root of that is inspiration, but also the inspiration of spirit. And so the simple act of breathing is an act of connection with everything because you're breathing in the universe. And then as you breathe out, you're giving back, you're giving of yourself to the universe. So, simplest practice, pause, breathe, pay attention to breathing. And then the second one that came up for me was my interpretation and understanding of the yoga tradition and its most fundamental practice is love, reverence, and compassion for all beings. And so if you're not sure about spirit and you're not sure about spirituality and you're not sure about God, you can still be kind to the other organisms, to the people and to the trees and to the plants and the flowers and the puppies and the kittens and the spiders and the oceans and the land and the stars and the moon and the sun. And so anytime I get overwhelmed by practice or the path, I try to remember that at its basic essence, these are all practices of loving ourselves and loving each other. Can I do something kind, either for myself or for my snoring cat in the other room or for anybody? And so if you're not sure about any of this, which is totally cool, I've been through my own rounds of uncertainty in this process, we can be kind, and that's its own most incredible and valuable practice.
Beautiful and such an important point. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Mary, how about you? Anything to share?
And just so you know, Mona, if you write those volumes, we will read them. I'm like, I'm on it. Where do I buy it? Um, so humor is one thing, as you can tell, is important to me for my balance. And I don't separate that out from spiritual practice either, right? I think when I was younger, I might have been a little bit more, okay, where's my mala? Keep my head down and all that. There's a real earnestness that I appreciate about my makeup that I can like watch sometimes. And then other times I'm totally in it. And then I go, oh, that's funny. I was so sincere about that, but like intense sincerity. And so I've learned to kind of soften around that as well. Um, but humor I find is really helpful. Listening to funny podcasts, watching TV. My husband and I always making fun of each other. And so that's good. But the other piece, one of my kind of daily reminders, I have these two like wrist tattoos, can't really see it, but on the one side it says being and on the other side it says becoming. And I got these a number of years ago because of this quote that I loved, which was always being, always becoming. And I think there's more to that, but that idea of the messiness that Mona's speaking to, right? Of like, there's this sense of being that's always present, and yet there's this human element that's always becoming. And can we have compassion for that piece and give space to all of it? Give space to the mess, give space to the moments of levity, give space to the grief, give space to the joy, all of these things. And the other, I know that's a lot in like 2 sentences, so I get that there's a lot more that we could go down that rabbit hole for 5 hours. But the other piece that I was thinking of is movement and allowing that, kind of to Angela's piece, like being in tune with the seasons, allowing us to remember, oh yeah, I am an animal. And so how do I discharge some of this? What's happening geopolitically? How am I absorbing that? Can I, turn off social media for a minute? Can I go outside? Can I look at the stars? Can I feel that sense of connection to something bigger without feeling like I'm dismissing? Because you still care, right? I think that's a big piece of it too, is having that awareness of the big picture, but also allowing yourself to go, okay, and what's one little thing? Oh, I can take a, sip of water, reconnect with my body. So those are a few things that came up for me as everyone's talking, but yeah, I'm going to be integrating this for a while, I can tell.
Yeah. Me too, Mary. Thank you so much. There was so much in that answer. And I love that the humor for kind of keeping in check the becoming part of the becoming being combo, right? Like if we can laugh at ourselves, we can maybe find ourselves a little bit closer to spirit and not quite so caught up in all of the ways that the ego loves to take itself so seriously. And but the compassion for that, because that's, yeah, we came here to be human and to become and to maybe take things very seriously sometimes. Thank you so much. The way that you all took that, it brought to my mind the only thing that I would add here in this way is gratitude. That my thank you, three of them. It's always three of them, because the first one is a little bit like, oh yeah, thank you, and the second one is like, thank you. And by the third one I've got there, thank you. I really feel it. I mean it. I'm with it. And the thank you for me just has become, because it's such a part of my spiritual practice, it's just become that the way that as soon as I put words to that, I'm connecting to spirit. It's just, it's a very, very, like the breath, being present to the breath. It's a ritual that connects me to spirit. um, and gratitude is a bigger than human. It takes us out of feeling so big and in control of things, and into feeling small and marvel and wonder and awe. That is so much, yeah, the realm of where spirit lives. So look, yeah, before we hit record, I said, I think we're going to keep this to 45 minutes, max an hour. And I'm pretty sure that this is definitely probably more like an hour and a quarter. Thank you so much, for joining me here. For the future listeners, if you want to find any of us, you will through Kingston Integrated Healthcare. And with that, I would like to say that Dr. Sonia Nobi, who runs Kingston Integrated Healthcare, is here through all of us and as a thread that connects everything that happens in that space and so much that happens in our community. KIHC is such a hub for really beautiful healing emotions. And Sonia sits right at the center of that. And she connected us. This was her idea. So thank you, Sonia. You're here too. Um, and so I'd love to let's just close our eyes together for a moment. And again, if you're listening, you don't have to close your eyes, but all we're going to do here now is just acknowledge, for the four of us, this circle that we have sat in this way. Acknowledge the future listeners that were a part of this field and that informed the way that this unfolded with so much flow and wisdom, and what I feel is something that it will hopefully be of value to people that listen. So thank you, thank you, thank you to this circle, to the extended field, to spirit, and all the ways that we were supported and guided here in this conversation. And may we each go well in our separate ways now. Certainly, I will be nourished by this time together. Very, very much so. And so, with that, our conversation is closed for now. Thank you, friends. Such a joy. Really, really, really grateful for your time. Oh, Mona, did you do that on purpose? How did you do that? Oh, for listeners, she did something with her hands and like hearts blew out of her mouth.
Another Zoom thing.
Oh,
Watch.
oh, can I do that? Does mine do that? Oh no, Mona, you're magic. Nothing's
It
happening.
might just be the version of Zoom I have.
Oh, Mary did something. Superpowers.
Sarah, mine's broken.
Yes. Angela, do you see mine?
Feel my heart. I'm sending so much love out to you, even though I don't have the emoji.
Yeah, me too. Just two awkward hands. Thank you so much, beauties. Mwah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for bringing us together, Sarah.
Such a joy.